What is good
What is good?
singing?
Good singing for me does not depend on style. If the singer, if it's a healthy voice, if the singing is free and meaningful to that singer, if they are expressing themselves with their voice, then that is good singing. Health is important for me, and it's probably because of my age, but I can still out sing a lot of my 18-year-olds. And I say to them, and they say, how can you do that at your age? And I go, I know how to play my instrument. Yeah. So really my philosophy is function, understand the function, and then you've got function and style. You marry the two. It's a really good marriage, and it lasts for a long time. But if you just go for style or you just go for function, then that's probably end up in divorce.
This is A Voice, a podcast with Dr. Gillyanne Kays and Jeremy Fisher.
This is A Voice.
Hello and welcome to This is A Voice Season 6, Episode 9.
The podcast where we get vocal about voice.
I'm Jeremy Fisher.
And I'm Dr. Gillyanne Kays. And today we have with us our very dear friend and colleague, Dr. Irene Bartlett. So shall we say good day or good evening, Irene?
Just good day.
Good day. Okay.
Good day, Irene.
I want to try and get this right. You are Associate Professor and Head of Contemporary Voice at Griffith University, which is also the Queensland Conservatorium. You are Head of Pedagogy and Head of Jazz, and you're running a Master's in Vocal Pedagogy there amongst the teachers.
Yeah, I'm the Head of Jazz Voice because it's an umbrella term. It's umbrella, program, and the singers are the biggest cohort within the jazz area, but we're all under the one umbrella. So in other words, the singers are the vocal instrument in the band. That's how they're treated. So they have to do everything that the musicians do. Yeah.
And we've had the pleasure of seeing those classes in action,
We've been
which
there.
is amazing. I tell you where I'd like to go next, which is interesting, I hope. And this is going to be a bit contentious for some of our listeners, I'm going to say, that, some people are now saying we no longer need to use these labels of CCM, and I'm not going to say classical, I'm going to say Western lyric music, and that to use the different labels is divisive. Mm-hmm. Tell me why you think, because I think you do think, why do we still need to differentiate between these types of music?
Because the musics differentiate themselves. Your ears tell you that you are listening to something different. And that's even within contemporary. We don't have to call it CCM if people don't want to call it that, contemporary commercial music, Jeanette Levatrie's term. It just was a nice, at the time, it gave us something to hang around, whereas before it had been, the pejorative non-classical, which is always a bit of a downer. So, but, call it contemporary music, call it popular music. I don't care what people call it, but basically within contemporary music, there are so many styles, and the listening audience knows the difference.
Yes.
They know if they're listening to rock or R&B or jazz or pop or blues or dance or house or electronic music, electronica, whatever they call it, techno. There's so many different styles. And then if you look at classical, you've got so many different styles within classical as well. Oh. But the big difference is that line where classical appears to be more, shall we say, sung in the legato line and the melodies carrying through, and it's all about melody. And in contemporary, it's not about those things. So for me, we can't just say it's all, we can, it's all music, and God help us. I just wish that all young singers listen to all music, but that's not the case. And so if you play some of the like heavy metal stuff or rap to someone who's only ever trained in classical, it's like nails on a blackboard, and vice versa, exactly the same. If you play high-end opera to someone who's never, they go, oh my God, they're screaming. I think they are different. I think they're different. And therefore we need to say that.
We've said this for years, that you have different goals. You have different voice productions, you have different situations, you
different performing environment, for heaven's sake. One is acoustic and the other is largely non-acoustic.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Also,
And
different band, different instrumentation, different things that you're singing with or competing against.
And the reason that contemporary, and I'm going to use the word commercial because it's what earns money and what earns money on streaming and recordings as well as live. But basically, the reason that singers have to, and I ban my singers from not using it, they have to use a microphone. Even they practice all their scales, they practice all their actual technical work off mic. But the minute they get on to a song, I put them on mic, even in my studio. And the reason being, I don't want them to oversing. And what happens is the minute you bring in all those electronic instruments, we know that basically, especially with recorded music, it's all compressed into that around that 2 kilohertz range where it hits the ears the best, but that's just where the voice lives. So you get on a stage with a whole lot of electronic instruments without, if you're not careful, you will start to constrict to hear yourself better, to yell. So by having a PA, having fallback, that stops that happening. And that's very different from classical singing. I very much appreciate that classical singers sing over an orchestra. That's a huge amount of sound. But again, if being boring with voice science, but if you look at a spectrogram of a contemporary singer and a classical singer, you'll see that their formats are very different. They gather very differently, cluster very differently. And that's because the contemporary singer doesn't need to maintain across the top of the orchestra, but once the orchestra sound starts to diminish, the classical singer can also follow that down. Whereas a contemporary singer, that never diminishes. Electronic instruments just stay there. So it's a very different thing.
Really fascinating. I mean, it's great for me to have that explained. And I think it's also really useful for teachers because so many teachers that we work with are working with contemporary styles because that's what people want to sing now. That at some point you need to be working with the microphone and you need to be working with a sound system.
If you don't, this is a problem I see. We've got a lot of good contemporary teachers now. We've got contemporary studios. But if you never put your students onto a PA and they've got to go out and do a gig, and the first thing they do is put them onto a microphone, then they'll oversing, which means then the sound technician, or that might be someone in the band, or it might be someone out the front on a desk, will immediately turn them down. And so therefore it becomes more and more detrimental to their vocal health they're constantly trying to push across the top of all this electronic music. If you get singers used to PA very early in the piece, and so I used to do it with my little babies in that performance school, we'd have what we called mic time. And it was a treat. They got rostered on and they could get up and sing on the microphone, which was very exciting for them. But it was a way of showing them that once you're on a microphone, you have to let that do some work. You don't have to sing really loud, so you can actually save your voice. Because I say, if you're a gig singer, you're singing 3, 4, 5 hours. I still get annoyed, very annoyed actually, when I hear someone say, oh, but contemporary singers can use a microphone, they don't really need to sing. I'm sorry. What a PA does, what a sound system, or as it's called, live sound reinforcement, what it actually does is just amplifies what you're putting into it. So we're not talking about in a studio. Exactly. I teach my singers, I teach them a lot a cappella actually. I want them to trust their own ear and be able to pitch and basically be able to adjust to what's going on around them. But it's not about, with belters, they always think it's about singing bigger, but we don't want all that pressure behind the vocal folds. We want resonance to do the work. So, so you put a microphone and all of a sudden they go, oh, it's too loud. And I go, well, dial it down.
Yeah.
I'll turn the PA down. No. It stays where it is. You have to adjust.
You're working too hard.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, but this is really interesting because for me, it's the same in musical theatre training. Because how many musical theatre performances in the world now are not amplified?
They're all amplified.
They're all.
Even the rep country, even the high schools.
Yeah. So why are you not teaching people on a microphone? Because they're going to be singing, and people are going, I must sing louder because whoever it is sings so loud. And I'm going, stop doing that.
Taught to project
first
acoustically, it drives us potty. It's
nonsense. But first of all, you're doing 8 shows a week and 2 rehearsals possibly. And you are screaming your socks off. and you're going to run out of stamina. And frankly, exactly as you said, the sound engineer at the back is just going to go too loud, turn it down.
And it's a
And
massive,
what a waste of energy.
a massive vocal load.
Absolutely. And I just think that, I see, like you guys, I work with a lot of professional performers when the shows are touring Australia and they come into Brisbane, it'll be the musical director or the director of the show will send them to me and say, can you get them ready? They're doing a cover at the moment, but we need them on stage. Or the singer, the leads leaving us and we need them to take over, and you've got 5 or 6 lessons to get them to that point. And honestly, my strategy is to listen to them, always listen first. I listen to all my singers first. I don't put them through exercises. I just listen to them sing. So I can make some sort of judgment call about what it is they want.
Silent round of applause here.
But what they want to do and what they are doing, and I'm looking for the good in what they do. I'm always looking for the good in what someone's doing, and then go, okay, so that's good. So how can I enhance that? What can I do? And with music theatre singers, is the first thing I do is tell them, to stop pinning me to the wall. There's only me in the room. I need you to tell me a story. I'm interested in your story. I'm not interested in the fact that you can sing loudly. Yeah. So
I think there's been, this is us being contentious. I think there's sort of been a path that people have gone down in musical theatre, particularly in the UK. And I think maybe you're experiencing the same thing in Australia, that I think needs a bit of a flight correction. And I really hope that flight correction is going to come.
I think that my concern in a way is that it's being touted as a very limited palette of sounds, which is you must belt, you must legit, and you must twang the hell out of everything.
Here's my mix, here's this, and here's that.
And I'm going, you stick that amount of twang down a microphone, and it's horrible.
Because those upper frequencies, those upper partial, just actually take over. And so I'm with you. It's just so easy. So with the pedagogy program I run, we get singers, we get everything from classical, music theatre, pop, rock, we don't care. They come in, they want to teach, and they might want to only teach in their area. They might want to just teach rock or teach. We make them do everything. And the reason is I say to them, you need to know what your student feels like, so you are the student in these. So we give them one-to-one lessons. That's quite rare in pedagogy programs. So everything they learn in theory in lectures, they have to put on their own voice, and it includes different styles. The ones that are hardest to turn around, to be honest with you, music theatre trained singers, because everything wants to be that super twang, higher larynx, so that not letting the larynx just sit in neutral. It's all about getting that everything pingy and forward, and I love all of that. We need that, but I always say to them, right now, can we bring that back? How about we take all the twang out? Well, that's impossible for them, but let's take all of that ring twang out and sing with let's all sing with a very bad cold. And they think I'm nuts, but over the course of the program, it's the music theatre kids. I shouldn't say kids, they're all adults. Some of them are in their 50s, but all those students are basically amazed at the fact that there's more than one sound, one tonal color, one, we get them to try and experiment with timbral colors, and not just get stuck into that bright sound. But I'm with you, Jeremy. I think that it's sort of become the demand of the industry.
Yeah, the thing of industry sounds.
But hang on, there's the difficulty, which is when you just have that relentless ping in frankly whatever style, you lose humanity.
You can't hear the voice.
Yes, you can't hear the person. You can't hear the person. You can't hear the voice.
Yeah, I want to hear the person. Everybody's voice is individual, and yes, EQ and all of that, sometimes removes that. And I understand that's part of the genre in certain situations. It's not particularly for me. I really love individual voices. That is what excites me.
And we all know when we see someone that's really a performer that's really exciting, and just, especially as a teacher, you forget to analyze. That's when I know that I'm hearing that person, that I'm not stopped thinking about what they're doing, and I'm just hearing them. And generally it's a lot to do with storytelling, of course, and the ability to be in the moment. But yeah, I just agree with you totally. I just think that unfortunately you've got the same thing happening with you rock singers, and that where they're just told to yell and constrict and whatever, and all they're doing is having a very short career, where actually, I've taught heavy metal singers who are fabulous singers, but they know how to use effects. Just use those things as effects, and we do have the beauty of a microphone, so we can fool around a bit with effects.
And we are talking variety. We're not saying don't make the noises, but we are talking variety of some kind.
Oh, look, if you're in Legally Blonde, then you're going to make that twangy, and if you're doing an American Bronx accent, of course you're going to be there. But we don't really want to hear that if you're doing Sunday in the Park with George, or, I just don't want to hear that.
We often say to people, if we're talking about twang, my twang isn't your twang.
I love that.
Really know how to do, how to see something on a spectrogram. There will be slight differences because everybody's voice is individual.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about pasting on a colour. So, if we're taking that example of singing L in Legally Blonde, and we're going for that, those sort of accent patterns, if you like, or dialect patterns, and the colour of the voice, I still want to hear the singer inside that voice. I don't just want to hear the colour.
No, but I want to hear a palette of colour. If you're painting always in oils, or you're always painting in pastels, you're limiting your ability to, what happens in between? Can we just use that as an example, but does every colour have to be heavy? Does every colour have to be light? No, you can morph your way through, and a lot of that comes from the emotional connection, I always find too, if they're telling a really honest story.
I think it's really interesting, and in a way it's why we separate musical theatre out from pretty much every other genre. There are certain...
Look, she's nodding. Everybody, please go and watch YouTube and see Irene nodding.
Okay, so in most contemporary commercial styles, you're praised for a particular, I'm going to say it's like a vocal look. You're praised for being within that genre, within that style, within that niche.
Is that fair?
Yeah, and you basically, if you're in pop or any of the really commercial styles, you have to have, it's the idiosyncratic elements that you bring to your voice that are generally a reflection of personality or culture or upbringing, or it's that rawness that Adele sings with. When you hear her talk, that's her Cockney accent, that's in there. She's not putting that on. And basically someone who's got a much more refined, and I don't mean that in a good or bad way, but a more balanced registration, for instance. I don't want to hear them trying to do what Adele does. I just think in pop, you've got to have that thing that makes you different from everybody else. You've got to be the new.
I'm gonna say
there's signature elements.
Hang on a minute though, because in my head it's two separate things. Because there's a genre or a niche, a style niche within which you live, because all of those people who love that niche will then buy your album.
I'm with you. It's got to have those elements that tell you it's that style. That's what we said about people having a name for it. Yes. You've got to name it because they recognize it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And within that niche, you've got to have something that is distinctive enough without going outside that niche. Now, where it gets really interesting, and this does happen, is where you get somebody bringing niches together that are completely unrelated. And you go, wow, that's almost like a circus act, where you go, I've never heard that before, and that becomes really interesting.
Exactly.
The thing
is... And I'm hearing that less and less, Jeremy, unfortunately.
Well, this is the thing, because it's commercial.
Yeah. I think that what's happening now is that we've gone back to, like in the 60s, you had formulaic bands like the Monkees, where they were it was divided. And it's almost like we're getting into this formula thing again in the 2000s, where you have to fit into that box. So you have to do those things. And I think that's a shame, because what's happened is we're sort of going back to the future here, but there are no really pure musics anymore. Everything's a fusion. So you're usually a pop, rock, country. You could be all three. You could have, there are singers that I work with in Australia who are bringing a lot of classical elements into their pop singing.
Yes.
So there's no clear definitions anymore. And it's fusion music. Yes. It's like you bring with it what you've listened to and I guess your influences. You bring your influences with
But I
you.
think what's so interesting, I totally agree with that. What I think is so interesting about musical theatre as a separate category is that the job changes every 6 months.
Yes.
And therefore you are singing Legally Blonde, and then you're singing Phantom of the Opera, and then you're singing
Yes.
Grease, and then you're singing whatever. That you literally have to create a new palette when you change
Yes.
jobs. And often you are singing performances that night and rehearsing in the day with a completely different palette of
And
colours.
I think that makes it unique, really, because if I'm thinking about, and I'm glad that you said, when you're looking at Western lyric music, you know, what's often called classical, it isn't just one genre, it's an umbrella term.
Sure.
But I trained as a classical singer. And if I was singing something operatic, say 19th century opera, and I was singing Handel and I was singing Schubert, there's a common thread in the voice production. And I think that, I mean, obviously, you know, we could have a whole other conversation about which elements of voice production are common and where do they diverge. After all, a voice is a voice at a certain point. But I think that's very different for a musical theatre singer.
No, well, I
You've
think
raised a good point. This is another discussion.
Yeah, I haven't had that discussion. I can say to your listeners, we haven't had this discussion. But in my pedagogy program, I say that you have, if you're talking about genre, you really have the classical genre, you have the contemporary genre, and in the middle you've got music theatre because it spans both.
Yes.
And you're right, Jeremy, those singers, we're asking more and more, especially the females, that they can just morph from one to the other. And what a huge ask. So yeah, I think, again, it's not something we've discussed, but I totally agree with you. And I think I've spoken to other colleagues at conferences and things, and we all seem to be coming to this realization, if it's not a conclusion.
I mean, Jeannie Levetri said it decades ago, that it's a unique world. And I was so pleased to see recently published Elizabeth Benson's book.
Yes.
She talks in the introduction about how musical theatre, it kind of forms a bridge between the two. And you know, you've got to walk across both sides if you're in musical theatre.
And again, we're back to the word commercial. The reason those singers are having to do that is that then Broadway needs to, if you're talking about Broadway theatre or Drury Lane theatre, it doesn't matter, that you've got to get people in the theatre. And we know what's happening with opera. And by the way, jazz, my love, is that I call it the high end of contemporary, and you've got the high end of classical. You've basically got this polarization where you've got, I went to a jazz concert with my showcase of all the students in the jazz course, and they were, I mean, these are 17, 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old most players, and they're doing this amazing technical stuff. But the audience didn't understand a lot of what you could tell. I was watching the audience, and you know, they didn't understand a lot of the improvised music, and they lost interest. We have to realize that there are differences, and we have to be able to realize that the majority of people who are going to be working in our industry, the music industry, are going to be people who can either cover star singers. And it's all about singers these days. Whoever hears instrumental music anymore? When I was growing up, all the big bands would have instrumental. Cliff Richard's band always had solo albums out, you know, band albums. Yeah. But you don't hear any of that anymore. It's all about the singer. And I just think that I think it's harder and harder for teachers to really understand the instrument they're working with, to understand the personality of the person they're working with, to understand the goals and the aims of the person they're working with. It's not as easy as saying, we're going to teach you how to bridge your two main registers. We're going to teach you how to add resonance. It's always got to then be taken into style and go, all of those things are important. And I call them the pillars of technique. You must teach people how to breathe for singing, but for singing in the style they want to sing.
I was going to say, which particular style of singing would you like to breathe for?
Absolutely. It's like, if you use flow phonation and you try to belt, you're in trouble.
You're in trouble. I mean, we are going to have to wrap this up because I'm loving this conversation, but I have a question for you, which is actually quite a big one, which is, what is good singing?
Thanks, Jeremy.
What is good singing?
Good singing for me does not depend on style. If the singer, if it's a healthy voice, If the singing is free and meaningful to that singer, if they are expressing themselves with their voice, then that is good singing. Health is important for me, and it's probably because of my age, but I can still out sing a lot of my 18-year-olds. And I say to them, and they say, how can you do that at your age? And I go, I know how to play my instrument. My philosophy is function, understand the function, and then you've got function and style. You marry the two. It's a really good marriage and it lasts for a long time. But if you just go for style or you just go for function, then that's probably end up in divorce, in that your voice will give up the ghost through age, through change of, I've sung through lots of different eras. And the reason I could sing for 54 years continuously was because I was flexible enough to change. My voice could change to the style, and people want to listen to you. So yeah, I think it's good singing is healthy. We use the word free, we band it around all the time, but unconstricted, okay, and emotionally connected. And the singers, it looks like they're really enjoying telling me the story they're telling, and I don't care what their tone quality is, as long as it's a nice free sound. Yeah.
I mean, this has been so fascinating, but we are going to have to stop here because we're definitely going to bring you back next time. There is so much to talk about. For the moment, thank you very much, Irene, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
See you later.
This is A Voice, a podcast with Dr. Gillyanne Kays and Jeremy Fisher.